Football at 4 with Johnny Mack here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. We got a lot to dive into, John, obviously, with the big game last night. But first off, Andy Reid wins the Super Bowl. It's probably locally the biggest story surrounding that game. Would you agree, or is there something bigger about that game that stands out?
No, certainly locally, that's the biggest story coming from that particular game. You could argue nationally as well.
Yeah.
Andy Reid finally getting over the hump. But as I pointed out, he was the same coach Saturday as he is today on Monday. That was just a stamp for people outside the industry. People inside the industry already knew he was a Hall of Fame coach. He is a Hall of Fame coach. He was before the game started. He was after the game ended. But it was certainly nice to see him finally get over the hump, as I expected him to do. It didn't go quite the way I expected, but that offense eventually did, 53 minutes, but it came in waves, and it always does.
Yeah, there was a lot of, what do you make of the narrative of the people that essentially feel that Mahomes bailed Reid out, not only in this game, but throughout the playoffs?
Well, I mean, first team in history to be down by double digits in every single playoff game. So they're a different team. They have an offensive firepower that is not typical. I mentioned it a lot. I mean, you go back to the Houston game, you're down 24 points. I mean, every single NFL team is dead in the water at that point, except this one. I think that's the one game where you say maybe Patrick Mahomes bailed him out a little bit. I would argue yesterday he should have been the MVP. That was one of the worst games he ever played for 53 minutes. He was bad. He was not good. If he played just a normal Patrick Mahomes game, they win that game easily, and I mean really easily. But he was affected by the pass rush. I think Nick Bosa, in a lot of ways, was the best player on the field for the majority of that game. His pressure numbers were unbelievable, and you could see Patrick Mahomes feel, even when it wasn't there, he was seeing ghosts, so to speak. And then it clicked. And that's the pressure that offense puts on you. But you look at that 3rd and 15, Mike. It's interesting because the play was overturned. Remember, it was a completion ruled on the field to Tyreek Hill, but he trapped the ball, and they overturned it. That was an awful throw to a wide-open receiver. And then you're sitting there, 3rd and 15, under 17 minutes to go. Under 7 minutes to go. This game's over, and then the big shot to Tyreek Hill, and everything changes. And that's what Kansas City can do for you. So I give Patrick Mahomes a ton of credit for having the mental toughness to get through that bad game and turn it on. But overall, bailing him out, he had a poor football game for 53 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, Mahomes, even they said it during the broadcast. Aikman said, quite frankly, he hasn't played very well, but obviously he played big in some big moments there. You talked about the underthrow, but let me ask you about Reid in terms of, you said, you kind of alluded to it, but, you know, he had always been mentioned as he couldn't do this, he couldn't win that big game, the time management. He had 3 timeouts at the end. I thought that was kind of ironic and funny. But have you noticed or sensed or seen anything that Andy has grown as a coach from his time in Philly?
I think he is certainly, I mean, that's one of the strengths of Andy Reid. He's certainly open-minded. He embraces things. You know, I often talk about when we mention the Eagles coaching search and this narrative that they want new ideas and young offensive minds, and that's how people look at it. I mean, the guy who has been most innovative, by the definition of that word, the NFL, is the 61-year-old Andy Reid. I mean, nobody's integrated spread concepts better. Nobody's integrated pistol concepts better. Nobody's integrated RPOs better than Andy Reid, all married into the traditional West Coast offense that he came to Philadelphia with in 1999. Nobody has done it better in the history of the game. And I think I always say, I mean, people get mixed up. What's innovative is by definition new, but everything new is not necessarily innovative. And most of it isn't. You look at any business, for every good idea, there's about a million bad ideas. And Andy Reid has constantly evolved with offensive football with good ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading some headlines. Patrick Mahomes to the rescue just in time to save the Chiefs. What was it about the game plan, though, that maybe isn't getting enough credit that you liked as to why Kansas City won the game?
Well, to be honest, I mean, I'm not saying Andy was perfect. I thought they were a little bit too conservative early in the game. I understand how San Francisco plays defense. They are from the Seattle tree. That Robert Saleh is from that cover 3 scheme. They do everything to make sure the big play isn't there. And they kind of amped it up. And they had one safety basically in the parking lot the entire game. So I think Andy saw that, and he was content to go away from the strength of his offense and the big playability and take what was there. And that's not the strength of Patrick Mahomes. The strength of Patrick Mahomes is extending the play, getting defenders out of position, playing in a lot of ways sandlot football, and sometimes you just got to throw it up to a great receiver one-on-one, and ultimately it took him too long to get to that. So I think if you want to criticize Andy for something in that particular game, I think it would be the fact that he was way too conservative in the first half of the game, really the first 3 quarters.
Johnny Mac, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. You heard so much admiration from not only current players, the former players coming out. It sounded as if everybody was trying to win this game for Andy, and his former players were just so happy for him. It really cements his spot as a true giant of the game. I felt like that's what I felt last night was this guy. You know, here in Philly, everybody has their opinion, and he didn't win the Super Bowl, but it really shows that he is so much bigger than the guy who was just the former Eagles coach. This guy is a giant of this game.
Yeah, he is, and I've tried to express that a lot over the years, and I think that's best exemplified by his coaching tree, which is, the largest and most successful coaching tree probably in the history of the NFL, with the exception of Bill Walsh. So that's sort of, and why I always say in the industry, everybody already knew this. Everybody already knew what kind of coach he is. And then the second part is, a lot of people don't want to admit that sometimes you got to get lucky to win a Super Bowl, and the stars do have to align. So the goal is, and in a lot of words, the word process has been co-opted, even corrupted in Philadelphia because of another sport. But in football, it's always been, you've always had those T-shirts, process over outcome, process over outcome. You see them constantly at practices all the way down to the high school level. And what that means is, look, you're only going to have a certain amount of opportunities. Because of the talent level, because of the churn in the NFL. And if you don't have good players, you're not going to win no matter how good you coach. But your goal to coach is to maximize what you have. That might be 6 wins one year. It might be the Super Bowl another year. And that's always what Andy Reid has done better than just about anybody not named Bill Belichick, certainly in this generation. And that is the definition of good coaching, and that's the difference between how he was looked at inside the NFL world versus outside the NFL world.
Yeah, and also we talked about a lot we had Mike Golick Sr. on. We talked about it with you, and he played for Buddy, and we said, why do people in Philly appreciate Buddy more than Andy? And it's personality over performance, and that Andy just didn't let his personality kind of come out, and that made it allowed fans to really go after him for minute problems that he brought to the field because they didn't like him personally. Not particularly him. He just wasn't a very warm guy.
No, and it's interesting because behind the scenes he's got a good sense of humor, and people have talked about that before. But yeah, on the platform when he's doing press conferences, he was always the guy that was going to protect his players, protect his coaches, and sort of deflect everything. And you see that with Doug Peterson a lot in the same way. And there is personality. One of the reasons people bought into Chip Kelly's act was because of press conferences and because of the witticisms, and he was always ready with a quick turn of phrase. And Buddy was a little bit different, but he was just very honest, very engaging, and he would just speak his mind, and people like that. And then the second part is coupled with defensive football and how this city views itself. They always want a hard-nosed defense, and it's not the 1980s anymore. You can't play defense like Buddy Ryan played defense, even if you had those players. You're not allowed to. So the evolution of the game has turned towards an Andy Reid type coach, and I don't think people necessarily like that in Philadelphia, at least a certain segment.
Yeah, and of course, Andy gets that win. There is a flip side of things, and that was Kyle Shanahan. What role do you think he played in why San Francisco is left scratching their head? Because it wasn't a good look for him with his general manager calling timeout at the end of the half. And, the win probability numbers, they were over like 90% to win that game at one point. They lose
97,
that. Yeah,
96.
Right, and he was also with the highest win percentage in Super Bowl history. He was the offensive coordinator for that team. So is Kyle Shanahan the new Andy Reid?
Well, there's people that believe in Jimmy Garoppolo a heck of a lot more than Kyle Shanahan does. And I'm going to give Kyle Shanahan the benefit of the doubt because he's the one who sees him in practice every day and understands what he can do. And this goes far before the Super Bowl. This goes back to the playoffs. If you watch the entire run, the 49ers run, one thing was evident. You talk about their defense, talk about their running game. It was all spectacular. But one thing trumped that all. He did not trust the quarterback. So to get as far as he did without trusting the quarterback is pretty amazing. So I'm not going to criticize Kyle Shanahan. So when John Lynch is calling for timeout, I admit that's bad optics. He's not a coach. He's thinking, well, we can go down and score, but Kyle doesn't want Jimmy Garoppolo throwing the football. He wants to shorten the game. He wants to lessen the possessions. He doesn't want the football in the hands of Patrick Mahomes because if it's a shootout, he doesn't have a chance. And he understood that. And people could say Jimmy started 19 of 22, whatever it was. It was all play action. It was all play action with wide open receivers. It was all schemed. And once you get behind and you see the pressure numbers, when he was pressured, he was 0 for 7 with 2 interceptions. This is not a high-level quarterback. In a lot of ways, it's pretty amazing they got to the Super Bowl with him playing quarterback. So I can't kill Kyle Shanahan.
But I mean, I can agree. I'm just playing devil's advocate on this one. He takes the shot, and Ryan brought this up earlier because he's getting criticized for being very conservative. But then he takes the shot down the field where Kittle gets called for the PI, and it's like, okay, well then you had faith to take that shot there. Was that just taking a shot in the dark there? I mean, like a timing thing? Like, okay, right now I think we can sneak one in because, he made the play there.
Well, at that point, there's no real remember, if you get the ball back with just under 2 minutes to go and you go 3 and out, well, Mahomes has got the football back with time to do damage. As the clock starts to wane, you don't have to worry about that. So that's partially it. They also took a shot at the end of the game that people forget about. Emmanuel Sanders was open behind the defense, could have went in for potentially a game-winning score after they fell behind 24-20. People forget that. He just missed them by about maybe a yard and a half, 2 yards. And that was a nice combination route. So, I mean, that's what Kyle Shanahan's known for. He's a great schemer, probably second. Those are probably the two best offensive scheme coaches in the NFL on the same field. And I thought he did brilliant things. You saw they weren't effective running between the tackles, but they still had the running game because of the sweeps and what he's been able to do with Deebo Samuel. And you go back to all the way when he was in Washington. He did the same thing with Kirk Cousins. You got Kirk Cousins $30 million because of play-action passes. He's doing the same thing with Jimmy Garoppolo. But once you fall behind, and I talked about this all week with you, Mike, and Ryan and Jeff, once they fall behind, they're in trouble. And it took them a long time to fall behind. So for 53 minutes, this guy's a genius. And then it just all fell apart. And a lot of that is just the pressure.
Where did it fall apart?
Well, it fell apart on 3rd and 15.
Right, exactly. And that's with his defense on the field.
Yeah, and they were great. And like I said, if you're going – I think Nick Bosa was the best player on the field. I mean, that was one of those games where they just couldn't block him. And that was going to be the story of the game. If the 49ers won the Super Bowl, people were going to focus on that and say they just could not block this guy, and he stopped the most explosive offense, the most explosive quarterback, and all it takes is that one big play, and then the snowball's running down the hill, and they're just so explosive.
Yeah. Do you think that Shanahan put too much into the lap of his defense? Did he trust them too much?
No, I mean, that's what he had to do.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Well, I'll counter that, John, with people, they were the number 2 offense in the league. Were they just bogus numbers or what? I mean, they scored almost 30 points a game, and that wasn't really talked about all week about their they had a higher scoring offense than Kansas City did.
Well, you look at, once you get to the playoffs, obviously competition ramps up. And that's why I say go back to the divisional round. I think he threw it 19 times maybe, and I think it was 6 times in the second half. And then in the NFC Championship game, 9 times total. And I think people looked at it and said, well, that's because they were running the ball so much, they didn't have to throw it. Look, Kyle Shanahan's been a coach in this league a long time, a very long time. In Washington, he's in the Super Bowl with Atlanta. Certainly didn't have a problem throwing the football with Matt Ryan. In fact, that's why he lost the Super Bowl. Because when he was throwing it, he should have been running it. And that's where he should have been criticized in that Super Bowl. And just take the field goal and get off the field with a win. He does not want to throw the ball 9 times. He doesn't trust the quarterback.
Well, and
he shouldn't.
The throw he makes to Sanders, he has a chance to coach wrong, and he just flat out misses him.
Yeah, and at that point, that's not an easy throw by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a throw that you expect certain quarterbacks to make in that type of situation. And look, the reason I picked Kansas City to win this game, and I picked them to win 34-23, they won by 11. It went far different than I thought it would. But the reason I picked them to win the game is because they had the better coach and the better quarterback. And they had the better coach and the better quarterback. So it's tough to win that way. I said the margin of error was small. He coached exactly like I expected him to coach because he knew the margin of error was small. And it wasn't going to change. And he did, in my opinion, he did a very good job for most of the game.
All right, Johnny Mac's in the house talking football at 4, and, of course, that's the Super Bowl, so we're out of games. So what's next? Where do we move ahead to?
We're not out of games. The XFL, baby.
We do have XFL this next Sunday coming up. But what's the next biggest story upcoming for the NFL's offseason here? It's got to be Brady and where he lands, correct?
Yeah, I think all the quarterbacks. I mean, all the veteran quarterbacks. Drew Brees. The Saints are playing that game with calling Taysom Hill a franchise quarterback, which is absurd. He's the third-string quarterback.
Let me ask you that. My buddy of mine asked me this weekend, and I did not have the right, what I believe to be the right answer. But if they were to franchise Hill, would it have to be as a quarterback?
That's an interesting question. That would have to be an argument, because he plays so many different positions. But if you're going to play him at quarterback, and the essence is that's what they said, and certainly if they franchise, which they won't, by the way, but just for argument's sake, obviously that would be as a quarterback. So the Players Association would fight that and say, well, you can say he played H-back or fullback or wide receiver more for snaps level, but you're going to play him at quarterback, and if you want to franchise him, you're going to have to give him that number. So that's my guess of how it would shake out, but they're not going to franchise him. They don't have to franchise him. He's a gimmick player. They're trying to create some kind of leverage for Drew Brees and Teddy Bridgewater, by the way, who's going to get significant money as well. And that's just sort of part of the negotiating ploy.
That should be interesting. You mentioned all the quarterbacks. We've got Dak Prescott, Tom Brady, Phillip Rivers among the free agent class of quarterbacks. The odds on where Brady will land are out. The number one odds for 31 teams, Las Vegas is the top team about where he would end, other than New England, because it's minus 200 that he will be back with the Patriots. Vegas plus 300, Chargers plus 400, Tampa Bay plus 700. So Brady, where he lands, where Rivers ends up going, there's so much there. So we will have it all. Just because the football season is in the books doesn't mean football at 4 goes away. We'll have NFL every day, 4 o'clock, and we have XFL. We got XFL action, yo.
Yeah, we got Colin Thompson and Tampa Bay Vipers.
I have decided
since
I go to Tampa often, it's one of my favorite places to visit. I am adopting the Tampa Bay Vipers as my XFL squad.
Well, I would have, but Colin was supposed to send me some swag. I haven't gotten it yet, so until I do,
wow.
I can't justify it. No, I'm objective, though.
Do you think the league will be well received?
Yes. I think it'll be similar to the AAF.
Okay.
And I think that league was well received for the product. I think the product will be fine. I think they're doing it right this time. I think it will be a true developmental league, and you won't have some of the off-the-field nonsense of the first incarnation. But as I've said often, there's no way to make money. So it just comes down to how long does the rich guy want to lose money before pulling the plug.
Over under 3 years.
Well, that's what they funded it for, 3 years. So I'm going under just because of some of the volatility of the WWE stock over the last week. They fired their co-presidents. And one of the reasons, a little exclusive scoop for the Sports Bash, one of the reasons they fired the presidents is because George Barrios and Michelle Wilson, who ran WWE, did not want any XFL involvement because they felt it would hurt the WWE stock, and they felt that Vince would sort of take some of the assets from WWE, whether it's employees, people who work behind the scenes, and pull them to work in the XFL, because that's what he did before. They didn't want that happening, and Vince put his foot down and fired them both. So that's not a good sign.
All right. So we'll keep an eye on that. Our own Colin Thompson is a member of the Tampa Vipers, so we'll be checking him out. We'll talk a little XFL on Football at 4, but the offseason's busy, and we'll do that tomorrow here on the Sports Bash. Thanks, pal.
All right. Thanks, Mike.